Chances are there are others of you in the room who share my distaste for unclear language, jargon, cliches, things that muddle the clear spoken word. I spent the first half of my career in the life of higher education, which means I have had a lifetime full of unclear language. Academics may be the worst. I'm convinced that every time an academic writes a scholarly paper for publication, he or she edits that by going through and checking to see if there are any clear sentences. And if there are, take them out, rewrite them. I rebelled against that as a professor because I value clear speech. I work really hard to try to be clear, to communicate clearly, to get all of the jargon and cliches out. I may leave a cliche in maybe like once in a blue moon. But I work really hard. Now, every profession has jargon, and okay, I'll pick on lawyers first. Every profession, though, wants to show you that they've been off to school, and so they speak in a language that's unclear, just so you know they went to school. I even have guest lawyers in the room, so I'm in trouble. But let me be clear before I pick on lawyers. Those of you who are lawyers who give generously to the ministry of this church are not among the ones I'm picking on. But here is an excerpt from a public works contract. The revocation by these regulations of a saving on the previous revocation of a provision does not affect the operation of the saving insofar as it is not specifically reproduced in these regulations but remains capable of having effect. Just tell me plainly what you want me to know. Doctors can't laugh. You do it too. After your examination, I am confident that you are suffering from acute viral pharyngitis. Just tell me I have a really bad sore throat, right? Why all the just tell me plainly. We want to hear it plainly. And preachers are not immune, I know. If I'm going to pick on the rest of you, I've got to take my hit. When I was teaching at the seminary, I watched so many students who had filled 3 years of learning scholarly and theological language, and they wanted to impress the churches they served by sprinkling into their teaching and preaching some words like soteriology and ontological, and no matter that that didn't communicate to anybody, it just made them sound a little smarter. When I was a seminary student, there was a cartoon in the seminary newspaper that had Jesus talking with the theologians. Jesus is in robe, the theologians are standing there. And Jesus says to them, "And who do you say that I am?" And the theologians said unto Jesus, "Thou art the eschatological manifestation of the ground of our being and the charisma which makes possible all human relationship." And Jesus said unto them, "Say what?" Just say it plainly. We want people to just say it. And Jesus has been walking all over Galilee, preaching and teaching and healing and alluding and speaking in parables. And there's not much plain speech anywhere. For example, straight question, as straight a question as you can get. Jesus, who is my neighbor? Jesus says, well, there's a man walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he falls among thieves. Why won't Jesus just say it plainly? Then Jesus arrives in Jerusalem to participate in the festival of the dedication, which is a joyous feast celebrating the Maccabean revolt. And Jesus enters. He's walking inside the temple in the portico of Solomon, and the opponents of Jesus gather around him and confront him. How long will you keep us in suspense? Or, as other translations have it, how long will you annoy us? If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. And we understand. We're sympathetic. Just tell us plainly. We just want to hear it straight. I have a friend who's now retired, but when he was working, he owned a company that measures magazine advertising effectiveness. And he used to tell me all the time, it is impossible to be too clear. He cared about language. It's impossible to be too clear, he would say. And he loved sermons that outlined in clear, logical argument what the truth is. He loved a sermon that says, here are the 3 things that Paul wants us to learn from this teaching. And then he wanted the preacher to say those 3 things as clearly as possible. It's impossible to be too clear, he would say. Well, apparently Jesus didn't get that word. They've surrounded Jesus and said, how long will you annoy us? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. And Jesus won't tell them plainly. Why not? They had to be so annoyed. Here's what Jesus said instead. I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. Now, when my friend would say that line to me, that it's impossible to be too clear, I would push back a little bit. I would say to him, you know, is there no place for poetry? Well, poetry's not clear. What about the mystery? Does everything have to be clear? As plainly as we can say it? There's some things that are better said in a way that's not just plain. For instance, listen to the lines from this song written by Roger Miller. And I wake up in the morning with my hair down in my eyes, and she says hi. And I stumble to the breakfast table while the kids are going off to school. Goodbye. And she reaches out and takes my hand and squeezes it and says, how you feeling, hon? And I look across at smiling lips that warm my heart and see my morning sun. And if that's not loving me, then all I've got to say, God didn't make little green apples, and it don't rain in Indianapolis in the summertime. And there's no such thing as Dr. Seuss or Disneyland or Mother Goose, no nursery rhymes. God didn't make little green apples, and it don't rain in Indianapolis in the summertime. And when myself is feeling low, I think about her face aglow and ease my mind. Now, you know he could have said that plainer. He could have just said, I love her. I think she loves me too. It could have been plainer. But there are some things just too big and too true to reduce to plain speech. Episcopal minister Gary Jones says, the trouble with talking plainly about the things of God is that the things of God are anything but plain. When a person begins speaking with unequivocal certainty about God, this is a sure sign that he is no longer speaking about God. We can speak with unequivocal certainty about things our minds can grasp. But God is not one of those things. God grasps us. We do not grasp God. And so, instead of answering plainly, Jesus points them to the works he's done in God's name. Jesus' role in the world can't be reduced to some title or slogan he wears on the front of his sweatshirt. Preaching about Jesus can't be reduced to the 3 things you need to know about Jesus as Messiah. Jesus is the unique Son of God, the Messiah, the Shepherd, the bread of life, the deliverer, and so much more. And Reverend Jones is right. God grasps us. We do not grasp God. But some people just want it plainer than that. I was the interim pastor of a small church in Georgia. And after a sermon, I don't know what I had said to make this woman so angry, but she got the chairman of deacons and came over and got me in a corner, and she said, "Yes or no, do you have to profess faith in Jesus Christ to be saved?" And I started to answer. I said, "You have asked a big and important question." Now, we need to take into account, for instance, that there are some children who die in infancy. She cut me off. She said, "I said yes or no. Just answer me." And I had to tell her that I just chose not to play her game. And she said, "That's just what I thought," and left. There's some people who just need the big mystery packaged and plain. And so they surrounded Jesus and said, "How long will you annoy us? If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly." And Jesus would not tell them plainly. He would not play their game. Instead, he says, "If you want to know who I am, look at what I do in God's name. The blind see, the lame walk, the oppressed are set free. Look at what I do." You don't ask a sheep to define a shepherd. It's a relationship. Don't ask a toddler to define mama. It's a relationship of loving, trusting, provision, deliverance, care. Sheep and children trust because of experience and not intellect. Trust is built in the doing, not the convincing. My grandson Cooper runs and latches onto his mother because of his experience of trust, not because he's been intellectually convinced of the merits of the mother-child relationship. You cheapen the relationship when you want to get it too clear, too plain. The mystery of God's unending love isn't something we can put on a license plate. Jesus isn't about to answer plainly because the love of God in relationship to God's people is just too big for plain answers. And so instead, Jesus says, "You want to know who I am? Just look around. The works I do in my Father's name testify to me. But you don't believe because you don't belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish." And the sheep follow the loving voice of the shepherd like Cooper jumps into his mother's arms. They hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life. This is relationship. It is not intellectual assent to the tenets of the sheep-shepherd agreement. It's born of time and relationship and precious intimacy. Now, certainly, there is a place for the intellectual side of faith. We should all bring our brains to church. I spent the first half of my career in theological education. I believe the great commandment that says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. We need to bring our best thinking into the life of faith. But at the center of the faith is a doing, loving relationship. The mature Christian is not the one who can tell us plainly what the complicated and controversial points of theology look like. The mature Christian is the one who hears the voice of the shepherd and in the context of relationship follows him because his is the voice of eternal life. And Jesus said, the works I do in my Father's name testify to me. Last Tuesday night, we hosted the annual volunteer appreciation banquet for the Buckhead Christian Ministry. Our fellowship hall was nearly packed out. Trustees, employees, volunteers for the ministry. BCM, as you know, is a neighborhood effort. Our church supports BCM. A lot of other individuals and churches help families in financial crisis meet basic needs, but they also help with long-term help like life skills education. They help with housing and the like. Well, Tuesday night, 3 of the volunteers were invited to give up and just say in a few words why they volunteer with BCM. And there was one story that really moved me. It was told by Lynn Wagner, who's a member of the Episcopal Church across the street, a 12-year volunteer from St. Philip's. He got up and told his story. He said that when he was 12 years old, his father was 61, and his father had been working in the coal mine for 50 years at age 61. And he had a stroke, and it made it impossible to work, but he couldn't just quit and take the pension because it wasn't enough money for his family of 3 to eat and live. So he decided he was going to work hard to rehab to get back so he could be full-time in the mine and make a living. Well, he didn't rebound real quickly. And things got tighter and tighter for the family. They were making do on governmental supplied beans and all the rest. And one day, a coworker knocked on the door with a miner's pail, lunch pail, which he described as a long cylinder lunch pail, with a tray in the top for dessert, and then you'd put all the rest of it down into the cylinder. His coworker came with a lunch pail. He said, "Don't worry about returning the lunch pail to me for a while. I've got another one at home, but it's got a little something in it from the guys at work." Lynn said he watched his father open up the pail and take out coins out of the dessert tray, and then he started pulling dollar bills out of the rest of it. He sat and stacked the coins, counted out the money, and tears poured down his face. He was so moved by what his friends had done. And Lynn said it made quite an impression on a 12-year-old boy. And he said, "That's why I volunteer, to help folks who are having a hard time." Now, I've got no idea on how many matters Mr. Wagner and I would agree or disagree on theologically. I imagine there'd be some for sure. But it requires no theological litmus test to know that that's a man who hears the shepherd's voice. It's the story of a man who hears the shepherd's voice and has decided to follow because he knows that's the voice of eternal life. And what Jesus said about himself is true for us. The works that I do in God's name testify to me. The works you and I do for the cause of Christ and Christ's church are the marks of our devotion too. You've probably heard the old quip that says, If you were on trial being accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Your works testify to you. Now, I hope we'll all keep growing intellectually. I hope you keep going to Sunday school, keep reading books that deepen your faith, keep going to Speedle U on Wednesday nights, keep pursuing God with all your mind. But I challenge you in the context of prayer to listen for the voice of the shepherd, and then to throw yourself into a relationship of work and love that testifies to that relationship. A life of giving, a life where others could point and say, yes, 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 she hears the shepherd's voice. It'll look different for each one of us in the room. But I hope you'll pray about today what it looks like for you. What's a next step in your Christian journey that would be a way of saying yes to how much of the shepherd's voice you hear? Would you stand and sing and respond?